Yeah, so my presentation is on how Tibetan language is studied in the West. So in general, at the university level at least, there are no true Tibetan language programs. Tibetan instead is studied usually as an aspect of philology or Buddhology, meaning it's textually based. So this just demonstrates the difference in language requirements. So in a true language program, you're taking something like 7 times more language classes than if you are in one of these other programs. Right, so the example here is Japanese language. If I'm a Japanese language major, then I need to take, the basics of the spoken language. Then I need to take, advanced language classes. I need to take modern literature classes. And then after that, I start studying classical language. Okay, and then, in contrast, Tibetan, if you're undergrad, then you would really only do 1 year, and often that's optional language study. It's not even a requirement. PhD, the only requirement would be classical language. You don't even have to learn spoken at all. For example, I have my master's and I can't even give a simple talk in Tibetan. Okay, so what do we study in the West if we're not learning how to speak Tibetan? So it's mostly based on textual study, and when spoken Tibetan is offered, it's optional. The problem here is, as well, in the spoken languages, in the Tibetan spoken language programs, the teachers aren't particularly trained to be teaching second language. And on the other side, classical language is taught in English, and you just analyze texts using English medium. So this just exemplifies, I guess, the difference between studying a classical language like Latin or Sanskrit, or even Chinese or ancient Greek, versus studying a classical, quote-unquote classical language like Tibetan or Japanese. This is important because when they say classical Tibetan, it gives it a very archaic sense when you think about it, but actually it's not classical really at all. It's not a language of antiquity like Latin is, and therefore maybe it's not appropriate to use the same. So we'll just briefly enumerate the features of the grammar translation method. One, it's studied in an English frame of reference, meaning that if I go to class, and if I go to Tibetan language class, then my teacher is speaking English to me and he's explaining Tibetan in English to me. Vocabulary, likewise, I memorize, Sangye means Buddha, and that's all I know about Sangye really. and so on and so forth. Okay, so why is this problematic? An English frame of reference, one, doesn't give you any practice speaking or producing language. One thing that really stood out when David gave his presentation, he said, I didn't really get better doing oral interpretation until I learned how to speak. And that's the next slide, but I'll explain why. The other thing that David also mentioned was the importance of rhythm. And even when you're reading, you kind of develop this natural rhythm of language. This is called prosody. And that's also very important. The third thing you're missing when you have an English frame of reference is the cultural component.